So, everybody, this is, I think, someone that if we lived in the same area, we would be completely hanging out because I don't know many people who love Louis L'Amour as much as Kirby Jackson. And wow, he's also an author. And from what I've read about him, he writes about the gold mining that's happened over hundreds of years in the US, and he makes sure he gets out there and like Louis Lebois, before he writes, he's been there. Hey, Kirby, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No, well, thank you for being generous enough to actually come on and talk to us. So tell me, Louis Lebois influence? Tell us.
Absolutely. Well, where I'm from, the Western U.S., more or less, the far Western states, Louis L'Amour is kind of the guy who told us all about it. It came out of his own head, but he did tell us all about it. He kind of idealized it a bit. So when you're over here and you're from the far West, you kind of, you like Louis L'Amour. He's a well-known guy over here. He's been gone, unfortunately, for about 25 years now.
Yeah.
But he kind of left a legacy behind, and he kind of shows us what our ancestors did, and actually did a good job for a fiction writer portraying history through the eyes of normal people.
Yeah, I mean, I got that feeling when I read those I think it was the late 70s and the early 80s. I got the feeling that it was authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, it was always a published thing that if, on the back of the book, that if he spoke about something, he had been there. And
Exactly.
I've also heard that about you.
Well, I'd like that to be true. Yeah. I write a lot of fiction and a lot of nonfiction, and I try to make sure that when I do write fiction, that it is said as accurately as I can. That basically, if people go out there and they say, "Hey, is this really out there?" They'll go out there and say, "Yeah, there it is."
There's that big rock. There's that tree.
Exactly. Or there's that creek and there's that gorge there or that canyon there, or there's that old mine right there.
That is so cool, eh? And then, of course, that's what we're talking about is mines and things like that. And most of your writing is about the history of gold mining in the U.S. And tell us a little bit about which part of the U.S. and why you feel called to write about it.
Well, I'm located in Southwest Oregon, which locally we kind of have a strange culture. We actually have more of an affiliation with Northern California, actually. Way back when, before these were states, we kind of all got together and there were ideas that our forerunners made. We were going to have our own state, and
Okay.
it was mainly a locality based more upon mining and timber harvesting and farming. And needless to say, we've got kind of a very unique culture here locally. And I was born here, so that's kind of why I pay attention to this area, and I kind of try to base everything here. I haven't always done that, but I'm where I'm from, and I'm trying to do my best to kind of keep the history alive here. And we used to do a lot of mining in this area. We really don't now. There's still a lot of miners about, but we're all pretty small scale these days. But
Yeah.
we used to have big mines here, and that's what I like to do. Is I like to go out and find those and look at those and do research on them and share that information with other people.
There were big gold mines, eh?
Oh yeah, they were big. They were there's open pit mines here that are they're a mile across, some of them. And there's hard rock mines they go into hillsides thousands of feet deep.
Wow.
And unfortunately, a lot of people, if they really don't know to look for them, they don't even know they're really there.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, that makes a lot of sense because there's a thing called the Fort Dome in South Africa where apparently the meteorite hit and brought all the gold up that we take out of here.
Yeah,
And a lot of people don't know that who live here. So you are trying to get the information out about the gold in your area.
right. And it's not just the gold. We also had a lot of copper mining here. We mined platinum here, uh, silica, limestone, gravel, things of that nature. So needless to say, I'm kind of interested in mining as a whole, even though I am mainly a gold miner
Yeah.
myself.
Okay, and so you've done some mining yourself, eh?
I actually split my time as far as making a living between mining and writing, so I do a lot of both.
And how's the mining going at the moment? Are you getting any gold?
Oh yeah, we always find gold. It's at the moment it's kind of difficult. We have a situation here in the far west that it's basically the political situation. There are certain people out there, they don't like mining, they don't like mineral collecting or metal detecting or logging, and it's kind of one of those things that there's definitely a movement out there they want to outlaw. So they're kind of making it a lot more difficult to do than say my the problems my great grandfather had when he was mining, or the problems my grandmother had when she was mining years ago.
Okay, well, that brings me to two things, and I want to speak about both.
Okay.
Okay, I was doing a little bit of research, and I saw that there are some political problems. So we'll get back to the mining in the old days. And I mean,
Hmm.
you guys have been there since the 1600s, but can we get back to that? And if I forget, please remind me.
Okay.
But what are the political problems? Why don't people want you to mine? Is it environmental? What are the reasons?
The excuse is environmental, but what we've found with what we've done is that we've got an awful lot of science on our side too, and we've kind of had a lot of sparring with the environmental groups. And what we tend to notice is they talk a lot about their science, but when we bring it forward, they don't want to really hear our side. So it's really not about an environmental issue from my perspective, and I have studied this extensively and been involved. That I think it is more about who wants to control the land. You know, is it going to be the miners and the farmers and the loggers who've been here for, some of us 6 and 7 generations now, or is it going to be sort of the newcomers who really don't like that thing and they really want tourism and city offices and things of that nature? And it's kind of a difference in a system of values, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's interesting though. I mean, like, as far as tourism goes, people are interested in visiting gold mines. So
Oh,
tourism
absolutely.
should work.
Yeah. Yeah, that would absolutely work if you look at, say, Virginia City down in Nevada, down there on the Comstock. That is a big tourist thing, and it's mining based. But unfortunately, here locally, we don't have that. Here in Oregon, we do have what's called the Sumter Dredge. That's in Northeast Oregon, over by Baker City,
And what is
and that
that?
is
Sorry, just for people who
uh,
don't know.
the Sumter Dredge is a dragline bucket line dredge that actually worked that area over there for gold back at the turn of the century. And
Yeah.
today
Okay.
it's a state park that the state of Oregon maintains, and you can go visit it. And there's thousands and thousands of people go and see it every year, and it's a tourist draw. And needless to say, there's kind of a difference over there and where we're at here in the southwest side. Over there, they are a little more in touch with their mining roots, and I think it does have to do with the fact that they've done a much better job developing kind of a tourism industry slightly based around mining. So, needless to say, when people go over there, they visit or they move there, they accept the fact that there were miners there for years and years and years.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm still going to come back to your history and how far back your
Okay.
family comes from the US, but or was, brought into the US. But uh, you speak about them having a mining history, and you guys have a mining history, but you still mining gold.
Oh
How
yeah,
much gold are you guys bringing out every year? Is it worthwhile? Is it financially viable?
it can be at times. You know, it's not the easiest business in the world to be in. I'll tell you that much. I mean, you can anybody who's ever seen Gold Rush Alaska, even though it is just a show, you can kind of see some of the things that go wrong. If your equipment doesn't work that day, you don't get paid. If you have something you dig at the wrong spot, you don't get paid, and things like this happen. Uh, we do get by, you know, and
Yeah.
we manage to keep the equipment up and things of that nature. And so it's kind of one of those things: you're either doing really, really well, or you're doing very, very poorly.
So
So
does it depend a lot on luck, would you say?
absolutely, there's a little bit of luck involved. It's the reliability of your equipment, how good your ground is,
I suppose
yeah, and
preparation as well.
preparation is a big thing. I have mined with people in the past where
Yeah.
you get there to the work site and they're not there. They got sidetracked with something else. And needless to say, as long as everything runs efficiently, things go well. If they don't run efficiently, it's no good.
And of course, like you said a moment ago, it depends what's in the ground, eh?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, unlike a somebody who works in the timber industry, which is another big industry here historically, we can't see what our product is. Unfortunately, with the
That is
logger, they
so
can go
true.
out. With a logger, they can go out and say, "Well, there's my money there on that tree and that tree and that tree." And with the miner, unfortunately, you got to go, "Well, there may be something there."
Ah,
Maybe.
fully, eh? It's always a guessing game. It's always maybe, eh?
And we've actually got a pretty good idea what we have. I mean, we had the claims we have. They were actually owned by a pretty well-known geologist up until last year. So I mean, we've kind of got a better idea than most people, but it's still pretty hard at times.
Yeah, because um, even the geologists can say, you know what, it's yeah, or it might be yeah, and you guys still have to take a chance. It's like a gamble,
Yeah.
eh?
Oh, I was going to say, in addition to that, you can know that everything is there. For example, we've got one tunnel that we know on the back wall of that tunnel, there's some ore that runs 5 ounces of gold per ton, quite a bit of silver. That would pay us very well. Unfortunately, in the meantime, a lot of these mine workings are so old, you open them up and you go, wow, everything's fallen in. We got all this work to do before we even get there. And that's a lot of it. You know,
Yeah, I
it's,
do
it's
get
kind
that.
of one of those things. It's
Yeah,
kind
I
of one
do
of those
get.
things you're always working for the goal and the goal's never close.
Yeah, and there's always like, I mean, if I have to, let's say I decide to do a project at home, and then I go, okay, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to need this tool, and then I have to go, oh wait, that tool has been borrowed by this particular family member, so I first need to fetch that. And so
Right.
so if you go to a mine and it's fallen in, you first have to start going through that process of what tools do we need to fix that mine and
Absolutely.
get it working, and yeah, that must be quite frustrating. What is the geology of the area though? It's all alluvial gold.
We actually have a mix of alluvial gold and hard rock gold. This area historically is known for placer gold, which is alluvial gold. That's your gold that has broken free of the lodes. But we do
Because
also
that's the
have,
kind of thing people find when they're just in the
right,
1800s or 1700s looking in a river. Yeah.
right. And here locally, we did a lot of placer mining historically, and then we did start doing lode mining. We actually own one of the earlier mines, which is positive and negative. The workings are old, but they really didn't get the opportunity to really do hard rock mining really the way they could have done. It's kind of a resource that was never exploited as completely as it could have been. Whereas Northeast Oregon, which is on the other side of the state from us, they actually did more hard rock mining than placer mining. So we're kind of on two opposite sides of the spectrum as far as geology. And there's kind of an interesting story about the geology between here and there. There's a theory, and the theory is, and we know some of this is fact, that the theory is at one time the western portion of North America was submerged under the ocean and gradually rose up out of the water. And we
Yeah.
know that because of the fossil record and the types of sediments that have created sedimentary rock.
Yeah.
But there's a theory that there was what they called the Siskiyou Island. And what that theory said, it said that a certain portion of North America was actually above water while this was going on, and it was the oldest portion of the far west. And where I'm at, that's actually where I'm at, is what they call the prehistoric Siskiyou Island, and that went basically. They think it started about Redding, California, and went north to about Roseburg, Oregon. And I'm kind of dead center in the middle of that, more of the northern end. And because of the age of that, we have a lot of gold, platinum, and other minerals. And at the same time, Northeast Oregon, there was also a theory that they were kind of the same way, that portion over there had also been an island. So it's kind of unique geology.
Sure. Yeah,
It's,
that is very interesting, eh?
yeah.
Because as you probably know, I mean, a lot of South Africa's gold comes from the old inland sea, which
Right.
had gold pouring in from rivers and whatever you, and then of course it with metamorphic and whatever you
Right.
activity and yeah. So uh, our black rock, our black ore, they call it,
Mm-hmm.
is from the old sea, which is now
Right.
from sedimentary become more quartzite, and you got all these little cobblestones in them, and then you get the gold in there. So it's so wonderful for me to hear
Yeah.
your history of where the gold comes from. It's very, very interesting.
And we actually have where I mine in the Galice district, which was originally based around Galice Creek. Nearby Galice, about 5 miles down the Rogue River, we have a place called Rand. And Rand is actually named after your Rand district in South Africa because they thought that the geology was pretty similar to what was found in Rand. So they called it Rand. And it was also later known as Yank. As Yankville. Yankville. Yeah.
What?
They actually called it Yankville for a while also. The reason it was called Yankville, there was a guy by the name of Yank McNair. That was his nickname. His actual name was Neil, but they called him Yank. He was a Yankee.
Yeah.
He came from the Northeast states,
Yeah.
and he came here and he made a discovery of a large lode, and they called that the Yank Lead. It was a ledge of quartz that's about 50 to 60 feet wide, and it crossed the Rogue River, and he made a discovery there in 1874. And they called that the Big Yank Lead after him, and they started a little town, and it was called Yankville, named for him. They also called it Yankton.
Does that town still exist?
No, it doesn't. It was actually platted on the survey maps, but it was just kind of a mining camp. We think it was a tent town.
Okay, yeah.
Eventually, Yankville became what they later referred to as the Almeida Mine area. That was the Almeida Mine. That it started up in the 1890s. It was actually managed by I met a guy on Facebook by the name of Stephen Wickham, and it's actually his great-grandfather was actually the manager of that mine, and he's now over in, I think he's in New Zealand or Australia now, so it's kind of odd, but, that's, the Almeida mine was actually named for a young woman who was a niece of one of the owners at the time.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think we need to move on because you are showing your ability to remember facts and historical facts, and and we need to lead on to your writing. But just before we go there, so you were saying it was Rand because it was similar to the geology of the Witwatersrand area in South Africa.
Right.
Is it because it was also an under a shallow sea which was now under the ground?
I think so. There is a theory about that area here, and what they say is, and this is going back to the prehistoric island concept, it's about this area.
Yeah.
And there used to be an ancient river run through this.
Okay, and that's where the gold got deposited.
Yeah, and that was a primary source of a lot of placer gold that was mined in this area. It was about 2 million ounces of gold came out of this ancient riverbed, and we're still mining it today.
Wow.
There's still mines out there. We're still tapping that. There's a lot of it has not been mined yet. And one of the theories is that at Galice Creek, that this was the mouth of it, and that kind of what is now the Rogue River and so to the parts north of that was an inland lake. And Rand is actually part of that area that subscribes to the inland lake theory. And I think that's part of the reason they named it after it was obviously you had an inland sea or an inland lake there in South Africa, and we had one here, very similar in geology.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's very interesting. And I would imagine that, like you said earlier, I just want to go back to that last thing, I promise. But you were saying that in the northern parts, they've actually done, proper mining, not just open cast. They've actually done rock mining. Do you think that there's potential if the Australians are very good at it? I'm not going to mention any company names, something that begins with a B, and then you got the South African English thing going on, and so on and so on. Yeah. But do you think if they came and looked at the rock mining, the deep, going down to 2.5, 3 kilometers or 1 kilometer, do you think they would find stuff there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. As I said, the mine we have now, it's one of the older ones in Galice. It was actually previously owned by a geologist, and he was associated with a large company. I won't name them, but they're well known. Well, they're one of the, let's call them in the top 10 of mining companies in the world. Let's say that.
Yeah.
He had it. He felt it was economic. He is a well-known guy. He got older, decided he wasn't gonna. He's actually still with that company. He decided he's really getting too old to go mining on his own and do this anymore. And kind of
Yeah.
strike out on his own. But he felt the potential was there. A few years ago, the Greenback mine, and at one time the Greenback was the biggest hard rock mine we ever had in the state of Oregon, and that's here locally. There was interest on the part of a Canadian firm to come in and mine that, and they had about 14 geologists working in it. They retimbered the mine, and it's a good sized mine. It's
Yeah.
aggregates about 15,000 feet of tunnel, 15 winzes, crosscuts, shafts, the whole 9 yards.
Okay. Yeah.
And they actually found that there was about $500 million of known reserves showing in gold. But the problem is that the Canadian firm who was interested, they felt that the political climate here with the environmental movement was such that they would just never get started. And that's kind of one of the problems we had. We've had I think it was a firm from New Zealand was actually interested in mining some nickel laterite here in this area. We've got a lot of nickel laterite. And what the laterite is, it's actually kind of a red clay cap that's found over top of these ancient channels. And what they found was there was a guy by the name of, I can't remember his name offhand, but there was an older miner, had done quite a bit of research and study on evaluations, and he found you could actually take this red clay stuff that was this red dust that we all hate in this area.
Why does it get in your washing and stuff? What?
It's one of those things. If you live in that area, it's always everywhere. The wind blows.
Okay. Yeah.
There's dust all over the place. I knew an Australian that had seen it, and he referred to it as bull dust and said it was pretty similar to some of what they had in Australia. And he
Well,
just
what
hated
we have here is, sorry to interrupt you, but we have gold mine dumps. We call them mine dumps, and it's just mine dumps where all the mining material has been brought out from underneath, and then you got these big tabletop looking things, and they try to put grass and trees on them, but the dust still flies over everything.
Right.
Yeah.
And what this miner found he could take this red stuff, this nickel laterite, and he could actually put it in a furnace. He could make stainless steel out of it with one process. All he had to do was dig and smelt it. That's it.
Wow.
And he proposed a plan to get that up and going. He wanted his patent on the claim, and the environmentalists just lost their mind, and it never got off the ground. And that's kind of what happens here. Is there is a lot of interest, especially in that area where he was at, which is the Josephine Creek district or the Old Waldo district, and also in the Gleese district where I'm at, the Greenback district, which is north of us. And there's always been a lot of interest, but there's issues happen. There was a pretty big nickel mine near Riddle, Oregon, which is about 50 miles north of us, or 100 kilometers, you guys would say, roughly. And that was a very large nickel mine they had there that the Chinese operated. And eventually they did a couple things wrong and they got shut down, and that was the end of it. And kind of there it sits.
Okay, so obviously, I mean, we understand that there is an environmental thing, eh?
Right.
Yeah. So Kerby, I've been delaying but loving and just waiting to hear about your hundreds of years that your family's been in the US. How long back do you go?
My father's family came to North America, we know at least probably in the early 1600s. They were some of the first people over here. And basically, we know for a fact they've been here since the 1650s. Some of my ancestors, they were the founding people of Andover, Massachusetts, originally.
Okay,
and the Allen family.
And they arrived how?
They basically came over by boat from the UK, from Europe, much as anybody else's did.
Yeah.
And they settled back there. And so my father's family, they spent an awful lot of time back there. My grandmother was actually the first generation from the east on that side of the family to come out here. And she eventually came west, and she became a miner, and she did some other things, and she liked to live out in the woods. And I think I probably get quite a bit of things from her. A lot of my interest came from her. And she basically decided she wanted to live the Old West life, but she was a little late for that, unfortunately. She was about, I think that was in the 40s she got out here, and unfortunately it had been over for quite a while. but she
Yeah.
liked to live in the woods, and she kind of lived out on her own and mined, and all she had was a dog and a rifle, and that was about it. And she kind of just made her way out there. And she mined down there in Nevada on the Comstock, and she did some mining down there in the Mother Lode in California, and eventually she wound up here. But her family's been in the country for a very long, long time.
And so she was mining gold by herself out there, and
Oh yeah, yeah. She was mining gold and just kind of making her way. She was if she needed something to eat, she knew that she could make a salad out of wild greens that she would find out there growing
what
loose.
kind of
Or she,
wild greens? I'm sorry, I know I'm going to extend this interview, but yes, that's
okay.
interesting for me.
Basically, she would find wild mustards or what we call miner's lettuce, which
Yeah?
is a green. It's kind of a got a long stem with a flower at the end and little round and kind of a round leaf that grows around it. And during the gold rush era, the miners they found that if they ate miner's lettuce, they wouldn't get scurvy, because you need vitamin C to prevent yourself from getting scurvy. So this miner's lettuce, not only did it taste pretty decent, you can still find it today.
Yeah,
It would
sure.
prevent scurvy,
That's
and kind of
amazing.
fill your stomach on top of it.
It
So,
obviously had vitamins and all those kind of things, eh?
oh yeah, it's very nutritious. It doesn't tend to taste bad. So she would find that, or she would find mustard greens. She would get a deer every now and then, or a squirrel, and she kind of did some things people frowned upon even at that time. But that's how she lived, and she would go out there and mine gold and kind of stick to herself.
But
You know,
that's man, that's what I love about what I'm doing is talking to people like you and hearing about your grandma, and that she was a survivor
oh, absolutely.
and just got on with life and did whatever she had to, and it makes what I do so interesting. But then it brings me to the next thing is your grandmother was surviving out there. She was living off the land. She was mining and getting through and just doing everything. And that's so much like the woman in Louis L'Amour books. Do you think that, and I know he's an influence, that your grandma was very much like a Louis L'Amour woman, a strong Western woman?
I would say that she probably was, and I think where she came from the East, she had a stereotype in her head. My father's family, they weren't Westerners, whereas my mother's family were. And I think there definitely was an influence. And needless to say, I do know that my grandmother was a big fan of Louis L'Amour, and she read Zane Grey and things of that nature. So I think that she kind of probably copied a little bit of that, and she decided this is, what I should do. But it's kind of odd for a woman at that time period to have done that on her own. I've got another great grandmother that she was Western, and she was kind of very similar, but she didn't go to such extremes. But there were similarities between them.
So it's almost like a strong gene. So there was a
Yeah.
strong line of women, and the one hadn't read Louis L'Amour, but
Right.
loved the Louis
Well,
L'Amour life. Then the other one had
actually,
read.
both of them had.
Oh, had they
Actually, both of
both?
them had.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
Is
my
Louis
my
L'Amour that old? Has he been
uh,
writing for that long?
he's been writing since about the 40s, so I suspect that they probably didn't get
Wow.
into him
Okay.
until later on. They were probably reading Zane Grey and Ernest Haycock before
Yeah.
that, probably
Yeah,
Luke
you
Short.
know what? Sorry, Kirby, but obviously, growing up being 9 years old in 1979, thinking Louis L'Amour, this was the first time he had ever written anything when I read him.
Yeah.
So, so I didn't realize how far back he went. Wow. And
Yeah, he was
yeah,
actually a pulp writer. They had what they called the pulp magazines. He started writing, I think, in the 1930s, and he had kind of an interesting life. Some of it they thought was a little bit fabricated because he was trying to create a legend for himself. But at times the other part of it was true. Like they knew he was a hobo for a while. That he actually rode on boxcar trains around the country and just kind of got in these adventures and did some boxing in back alley streets. And he actually did some work on mines and things of that nature. And kind of had a really odd lifestyle that kind of anything that was kind of out there on the verge of what was considered a frontier, he was doing it. That I'm sure if he could have went to the moon, he would have went to the moon because he was just kind of that sort of guy.
he was,
He
eh?
he really kind of liked to push these boundaries and kind of go out there, and it kind of like if nobody was there, he wanted to go there.
Yeah, and if you messed with anyone in his mind who was his family, you knew that he would take revenge, eh?
Oh, absolutely, and that is a definitely a Western tendency. I know that my
Fully.
great grand my my great grandmother had a story about her father that when she was a girl, they were living in a remote log cabin. I think they were in Wyoming at the time, and there was a story about what they called a dandy. Are you familiar with the term dandy?
A dandy, no. Sorry,
A
explain it.
a, a dandy is kind of like it's what Westerners referred to as a well-dressed city slicker who at the same time kind of really didn't know his way around the frontier.
Oh, okay, I'm with you. Like, yeah, a city slicker. Yeah, I get it. Yeah,
It's kind of the equivalent of what we would call today a yuppie.
a
It was kind of
yuppie.
like a
Yeah,
yuppie.
fully.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like that only 100 odd years ago. Well, there was a dandy came into town, and as I said, my great grandmother, she was kind of a young girl at the time, and it was her brother and I think her younger sister and her father and her mother were away attending to some sort of work. I think they were tending sheep at the time for a ranch or doing something, or maybe they were running the trap line. And this dandy came around. He had heard that these kids were in this log cabin on their own, and he thought he would go mess with them. He would go try to scare them. And he went up there and he was making
Playfully,
noise.
hey. Are you
Yeah,
saying playfully?
playfully,
Okay, yeah.
and he made a bunch of noise around there, not knowing that my grandmother's brother Ray, well, he picked the gun up off the mantle and proceeded to blow holes through the front door and shot the guy's hat off, and the guy ran away.
Oh my
Well, if that
word.
wasn't bad enough, when my great grandmother's father got home, he was pretty angry. That he was thinking, this guy who we don't even know who he is, he came out here and he messed with my kids. Well, he
Yeah.
went looking for him, and I've got a photo of him, and he looks like the type. He was definitely looking for revenge. That he went out there and he apparently found him, and he told him, you better get on the first train and you get out of here, or else. And he was a pretty tough guy. He used to worked as an Indian agent and a wolf trapper and a wolf hunter. And he used to pack a six shooter around and had the rifle and had the horse. He looked like he came out of a John Wayne movie. And that's kind of what a lot of my ancestors were. They did come from that background. That if you read a Louis L'Amour book, that kind of is who my ancestors are. And Louis L'Amour, he did his best to capture it. And yes, it's fictionalized, but a lot of it's based in reality.
Yeah, well,
We
you know
kind
what?
of we kind of have a very unique culture out here. It's different than other places.
I get it. And you know what? Even if he made whatever up, I don't actually care. I think he basically put it out there that don't mess with innocent people.
That's right. Yeah.
Isn't it? That's basically what it boils down to, eh?
Oh,
Don't mess
yeah.
with innocent people.
It's not only that; it's actually more than that. It's we have a great tie to the land out here where I'm from, and the far
Yeah.
west in general. And it kind of goes into that where a lot of Louis L'Amour's writings were about the land and who possessed it and who had the right to it. So you actually kind of have that conflict between the Indians and the settlers, both feeling that they have this attachment to the land, even though some were newcomers. And we kind of retain that to this day. And we're kind of a little bit in the same position. That I read Louis L'Amour novels now, and the themes that are in them with the Range Wars and the Indian Wars and the end of the Gold Rush era, it's kind of very similar to what we're going through today, where basically we're living here where our ancestors came from, but things are changing. That you
Yeah.
kind of have a large group of newcomers, and kind of society is pushing in that the world is not as expansive as it used to be, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah. Okay, so about your books. I mean, you've written about the Gold Trail. You feel passionate about the gold history and that. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
what is that your driving force behind what you've written?
My wife would say it's my driving force in general. My wife would say I have gold fever, which I probably do. What the Golden Trail is about, that is the most recent book I've done on mining history. And basically what I do is I've went into my archives, and I've done a lot of research on mining. That this is, as we say here, it's what turns my crank. Is I'm really interested in that. I do a lot of research
Yeah.
on mining and mining history here, and I'll go out and I will find something that's just kind of interest that a lot of people don't know about, and I will compile all that information and rewrite it. And that's what's in the Golden Trail. Is I went out and I pulled stories from all over Oregon and brought them all together in a book. And a lot of it is a friend of mine put it after he read it. He said, these are stories I'd heard, but I didn't know the details to them. And he says, you've brought the details together. So I've got like a story in there about the early discovery of what they call the Ogle Creek mine, which is actually up in the upper end of the Willamette Valley. And it's a fairly well-known mine, but that area is really not known for gold. And it's actually about these two 80-year-old men who, in their earlier days, they had made this gold discovery, lost track of it, and they went out looking for it again. But they were 80 years old when they did. Well, needless to say, they didn't find it because they were just too old.
But that's
You know, they
but that's amazing. I mean, Kerby, I
yeah,
think what you've done with those stories really makes a lot of sense to me because a lot of people will hear about mining and whatever, but they won't hear those personal stories, and they won't hear about the old guys who did this, and they won't hear
right,
about, like in Namibia, in where all the diamonds are on the coast, on
right,
on the coast of Namibia, and how many cars have been driven in there by so-called criminals, but they're just treasure hunters, and then their car breaks down, and then they never really get their car out of there, and hopefully they get out of there alive. And basically what you're doing is you're putting in the personal side. You're going into the history, and I think that's
right.
amazing.
And I'm trying to think what else is in that book. I've got a story about Iredell Bray. He was an early settler on the Coquille River during the Indian Wars, and he discovered a quartz ledge and then lost track of it during the Indian War. So there's a story about Iredell Bray and the Indian War that took place around that, and the eventual guy who did go out and discover that. So basically, I've kind of went from place to place here and gotten a story here and gotten a story there. And the book before that, Gold Dust, was very similar in that way, only it was more based here in Southwest Oregon. So in my book Gold Dust, I talked about the discovery of gold in Jacksonville, which is one of the oldest mining towns in this area, and it's still here. That town is still on the go. It's changed a lot, but it's almost in a preserved state. The original buildings are there, and they have a great sense of history, even though there's a change kind of coming.
Yeah.
You know, I did notice that. I went away to Europe, and I got married, and I told my wife, when you get back over here, it's going to be great because I'll take you to Jacksonville, and it's great. And I got back, and I went, wow, the place has changed in 5 years. Don't even recognize it now. So
Yeah. So journalism for you. I mean,
yeah,
is this your career, or is it gold, or what is it, Kerby?
it's kind of a combination of all of it. I do have a little bit of a background in journalism. I went to college for it, and I was going to be a journalist. And I kind of had a bad experience as I kind of went in there, and I was really into the whole idea of reporting on the story and basically truth telling is more or less what it was. And
well, that is journalism, isn't it? Truth in as far as what people say to you, because often the police or the witnesses will say certain things. You can only report on that. It's not necessarily truth, but it is your truth. Yeah, what you've heard.
Right.
Yeah.
And needless to say, that's what I believed. And I actually ran into a situation, and this was right before I quit journalism.
Yeah.
And did complete the college courses that I needed. I was like 2 away. I only needed 2.
Yeah.
And I had a situation where I was sent out for the college paper to cover a story, and what I was supposed to be covering was it was a story about these broken birdhouses, is what it was actually about. And it was supposed to be about birdhouses, and it was actually about vandalism.
Okay, vandalism. Yeah.
House. And I went out and I talked to the maintenance people. And they said, oh, we really don't have a problem with vandalism. Those broken birdhouses up on the hill, we accidentally did that. And I kind of went, oh, there's no story here. And then he suddenly goes, but, he says, and the but is that there was this string of assaults taking place on the grounds. That there was actually, it was a situation where some girl had gotten off of school and she went out to her car and somebody tried to abduct her. And there was basically this whole string of actual crime going on, not broken birdhouses. And so I did the interview when I wrote the story, and I turned it in for publication. And next thing you know, I'm told, we're not going to run that story. We can't run it. So basically there was a censorship issue, and at that point I went,
censorship.
I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And I decided I didn't want to do it. So needless to say, I turned after that toward what interested me, which was history of the gold rush, history of the Far West, history in general. That's kind of what really interests me is history, and also trying to preserve that history now.
Yeah, I know what you meant when you said about 3 minutes ago that, you thought journalism was about truth. I get that now.
Yeah.
You also, when you write, last thing, and then I'll let you go. I know I'm keeping you longer than I said I would,
Okay.
but you also, when you write about mines, when you write about rocks or trees or whatever, like Lulamoy, you've been there, eh?
Usually, yeah. Usually, I have been there. And if I haven't, the last novel I put out was called The Troubled Land. It's actually not set here in this locale. It's actually set in Malheur County, Oregon, which is on the border with Idaho. So that's about 400 miles away from me here. So in that case, I didn't have the benefit. I mean, I've been there, and I actually spent a lot of my childhood in Idaho, just over beyond that border
Yeah.
area, beyond the Snake River. And that's actually where I started mining. So even though I'd been over there, I was kind of having to reference back. I was having to do more reference and research for that novel.
It sounds
But
to me like you're being overly honest because you've actually spent a lot of time there. So I think
yeah,
you could actually you could have actually got away with saying, yes, I've been there.
well, I have been there. I was
Yeah.
very young at the time. I left. I was born here, then we left here, moved to Idaho, which is where my stepfather's family was from. So we lived over there for 5 or 6
Yeah.
years and then back.
Yeah.
And when we came back, which is strange, my attraction to this area, when we left Idaho, they practically had to drag me kicking and screaming away from the place. It's kind of
Yeah.
strange that it's kind of went the other way now somebody said, "Well, would you like to go back?" Well, no, not really. Because
Yeah.
things change.
It's
Things
how we
change.
change as people as well, eh?
Right.
But hey, Kirby, one last thing. Where can people get your books?
They can go to Amazon.com
Oh, cool. Okay.
or Amazon.co.uk. I think Amazon Japan has them. I think the French site has them. So basically anywhere on Amazon does have them. You can also go to CreateSpace.com, which is an Amazon company.
Okay. And
Uh,
they called
they're
the
called
Gold Trail?
CreateSpace. The books are called The Golden Trail, Gold Dust, and The Troubled Land. If you go to Amazon and just search for me, Kerby Jackson, Kerby's with an E, it's Kerby Jackson. Jackson's
Cool.
easy to spell.
Yeah.
So if you just search for me on Amazon, you will pull my books up. You'll also pull some books up that I didn't write, but for some reason come up, and those aren't mine. I think there's one called 1859 Oregon. That's not mine. So
Okay.
even though it sounds like it should be one of mine, but
Yeah.
it's kind of on the same subject. But it's a book that it comes up for me, and I wish I had written it, but I didn't. So,
Oh, so you obviously like it though.
oh yeah, I do. I've got it. It's a pretty good book.
Well, that's very magnanimous of you.
And,
And
and that is the other thing I'm really into is books. I have about 2,200 of them here. I collect books. Mainly history books, things of that nature. So I'm also really into books also. So you can kind of see all this coming together, especially mining books. I have a lot
yeah,
of.
yeah. Well, Kirby, thank you once again for your patience with me getting the nobody knows this, but the time zones mixed up. I thought, because I'm about to do an interview in Australia, I was doing the time the other way, and Kirby's been very patient, and thank you very much. And yeah,
I'd be glad to be on here anytime, and I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
no, it's a pleasure, and thank you very much. And everybody, go to Amazon.com and search for Kerby Jackson.